The dust hung thick and red in the air above Oakhaven, Nevada, clinging to the cracked, sun-bleached facades of buildings that had not known a living occupant in 20 years. It was late September 1897, and the air held a deceptive chill even before the sun fully surrendered to the horizon. Elias Thorne, a man whose ambition was as dry and brittle as the sagebrush around him, wiped a grimy hand across his brow, leaving a streak of red dirt. He adjusted the brim of his wide-brimmed hat, his eyes narrowed against the setting sun. Elias wasn't a prospector, not anymore. He was a historian, or perhaps a grave robber with a gentleman's education. He'd followed rumors, old maps, and fragmented journals to this husk of a silver town, convinced that its abrupt, devastating abandonment 2 decades prior held a secret far more valuable than the depleted ore seams, a secret he believed was hidden within the town's only remaining intact structure, the Oakhaven Bank Vault. "You sure about this, Elias?" Marcus, a wiry man with nervous eyes who served as Elias's paid muscle and occasional conscience, coughed, the sound rattling in his chest. Marcus hated Oakhaven. He hated the silence that felt less like absence and more like a heavy, deliberate presence. Elias ignored the question, his gaze fixed on the bank building at the end of the main street. The wood was warped, the windows opaque with dust, but the sandstone structure surrounding the vault looked solid, defiant against decay. "We're here, aren't we, Marcus?" The journal said the exodus was not about the silver. It was about what they found protecting the silver. Something the town elders decided was better left buried. "And you think it's still there?" Marcus shivered, pulling his threadbare coat tighter. "People don't just leave a functioning town overnight, Elias. Not unless they're running from something terrible." "Exactly," Elias replied, a note of grim excitement in his voice. "They didn't just leave, they were driven out. And whatever drove them out, some specific localized threat, a panic engineered by the wealthy to protect their claim, it likely stayed here, festering in the quiet." He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "The key is understanding the trigger, the real reason the town vanished. They had traveled 3 days by horseback from the nearest outpost, their supplies dwindling. Their only company was the relentless whispering wind. Elias knew they had to work fast." The sun was now a brilliant, bleeding smear on the western mountains, and the shadows were elongating, swallowing the street. As the last sliver of light vanished, plunging Oakhaven into a chilling indigo twilight, a new sound cut through the oppressive stillness. It wasn't the wind. It was a faint, metallic, clanking noise, rhythmic and mechanical, coming from the direction of the old blacksmith shop, a building they had dismissed as completely collapsed. Marcus stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the rifle slung over his shoulder. What in God's name was that? Elias felt a prickle of genuine fear, a feeling he usually enjoyed, viewing it as confirmation he was close to a breakthrough. But this was different. This sound was not natural. It was the sound of work. "Stay low," Elias whispered, pulling Marcus down behind a heap of splintered lumber that had once been a general store. He cautiously peered over the barrier. The blacksmith shop was a dark, jagged silhouette against the darkening sky. And then he saw it. A light. Not the steady glow of a lantern, nor the fleeting spark of a match. This was a pale, sickly yellow light that appeared suddenly in a gap where the shop's door should have been. It pulsed, casting long, wavering shadows that danced like skeletal figures on the dust-covered street. The clanking sound intensified, a rhythmic hammer striking metal, muffled but unmistakable. "Someone's here," Marcus breathed, his voice tight with terror. "We're not alone. Maybe they're claim jumpers." Elias shook his head slowly. "No. Look closer, Marcus. Look at the light, and listen to the rhythm." The light was too low, too focused to be a standard miner's lamp, and the rhythmic sound was too steady, too relentless. It lacked the hesitant human variability of a tired man working in the dark. It sounded driven. As they watched, a second light flickered into existence further down the street, near the remnants of the saloon. This light was different, a faint, almost greenish phosphorescence, barely visible, like a decaying firefly. It didn't pulse, it just sat there, a low, unsettling point of illumination. The mystery of Oakhaven, which Elias had spent years trying to piece together from dusty archives, suddenly slammed into him with visceral reality. The journals had spoken of the unsettling glow of industry that never ceased, of the unnatural fire in the desert's heart. He had dismissed them as poetic exaggerations. Now he saw them as terrifyingly literal. The story, Elias mumbled, gripping the wood so hard his knuckles turned white. The warnings. Never follow the lights in a ghost town after midnight. We're not at midnight yet, but those aren't lamps. The clanking from the blacksmith shop suddenly stopped, creating an instant of absolute crushing silence. The yellow light went out, but the green light near the saloon began to move. Slowly, deliberately, it drifted down the street, tracing a path toward the center of town. Elias felt the desperate need to retreat, to wait until dawn. But his curiosity, that fatal flaw that had driven him across state lines and into desolate wilderness, was a physical anchor, holding him rooted to the spot. "It's exploring," Elias whispered, drawing his own revolver, the cool steel a poor comfort against the vast, empty terror of the night. "It's looking for something, or someone." Marcus stared wide-eyed at the green glow, which was now nearing the central square where the bank stood. "We should leave, Elias, right now. Whatever that is, it's not human." "Everything is human, Marcus," Elias hissed, though his conviction wavered. "Everything terrible, everything mysterious has a human architect. We just haven't found the man or the mechanism responsible yet. And that mechanism is moving towards our objective." He knew the danger was immense. The town was alive with an unseen mechanical dread. The temptation was to run, but the need to understand, to find out who or what was operating these strange, solitary lights in an abandoned town and why, was overwhelming. The real terror wasn't in the unknown, Elias realized, but in the certainty that someone was here, deliberately recreating the unsettling environment that had driven an entire population to flee 20 years ago. The night had just begun, and the cold green light of Oakhaven was waiting. If you are as gripped by this mystery as Elias is, don't miss the next chapter. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a minute of Oakhaven's dark secrets. The moving green light was a slow, deliberate mockery of a lost soul, gliding inches above the uneven, dust-caked boardwalk. Elias watched it crawl past the broken window of the assay office, then hesitate near the water trough, before finally settling in the shadow of the bank. Its movement was too fluid for a man holding a lantern, yet too purposeful for something merely carried by the wind. "It's stationary now," Marcus whispered, his breath ragged. He was trembling, a reaction Elias understood but found irritating. Fear was a useful tool, but terror was a hindrance. "It's not stationary," Elias corrected, his gaze fixed on the bank. "It's observing." It stopped when it reached its target. The bank of Oakhaven, with its heavy iron door set into a thick sandstone wall, was their goal. It was also, apparently, the light's destination. The silence that followed the cessation of the clanking and the movement of the light was heavier than any sound. It pressed in, amplifying the dry rattle of the desert wind. Elias pulled a pair of field glasses from his pack, relics of his brief, failed stint as an army cartographer. He focused them on the green light. What he saw drained the blood from his face. The light wasn't a flame or a chemical glow. It emanated from a small, smooth sphere of dark metal, no larger than a man's fist, which hovered effortlessly just above the ground. Its surface was pitted, and from a tiny aperture the green light shone. The sphere was attached to nothing. "Tell me what you see, Elias," Marcus urged, leaning closer. Elias lowered the glasses, fighting to keep his voice steady. "It's a mechanism, Marcus. No wires, no tracks. It floats. And it is observing the bank door with an unnerving degree of stillness." Marcus choked on a gasp. "A machine that floats? That's not possible. It has to be a trick. Wires, strings. I'm telling you what my eyes, aided by the best optics money can buy, are telling me. It's a sphere of metal, moving by a means I cannot comprehend, but which must, logically, be based on physics we simply don't yet understand. Not magic, Marcus. Just advanced engineering." The year was 1897. Edison and Tesla were battling over electricity. Industrial invention was rampant. To Elias, a mechanical ghost was far more terrifying than a spectral one, because a machine meant a mind, a calculated, living human intelligence was directing this psychological assault. "We need to get to the vault," Elias decided, gripping his revolver tighter. "If the device is a guard, it means we are closer than ever. The creator of this terror is protecting something. And what if it attacks us?" Marcus whispered. "Then we will find out how fragile their engineering truly is," Elias said, though his hand trembled slightly. The difficulty lay not in engaging the device, but in anticipating the human mind controlling it. A man who creates a floating guard in a ghost town is not a sane man. They began to move, slow and low, hugging the shadows of the collapsed buildings, the dry wood splintering faintly under their boots. The desert air grew intensely cold, the kind of cold that suggested a severe drop in barometric pressure. When they reached the edge of the square, they paused, 40 feet from the bank. The green sphere remained motionless, its light fixed on the iron door. The eerie quiet was broken only by the frantic beat of their own hearts. Elias signaled Marcus to cover him. He drew a deep, ragged breath and sprinted across the open space, his boots kicking up dust that swirled in the pale green light. He hit the sandstone wall of the bank, flattening himself against the rough stone, the scent of dust and ancient stone filling his lungs. The green sphere rotated, not slowly, but with a sudden, unnerving mechanical whir that lasted only a fraction of a second. The light was no longer fixed on the door, but on Elias. A high-pitched, almost imperceptible hissing sound began to emanate from the sphere. Elias felt an instantaneous, sharp pain behind his eyes, a spike of pressure that made him gasp. It wasn't physical injury, but an intense, sickening dizziness, coupled with a wave of nausea. He pressed his head hard against the cool stone, trying to steady himself. Psychological warfare, he realized through the haze of disorientation. A low-frequency sonic or magnetic pulse to induce sickness and confusion. "Elias, get back," Marcus yelled from the shadows. Elias fought against the urge to vomit. He knew he had mere seconds before the effect crippled him. He forced his eyes open and saw the sphere had slightly descended, now closer to the ground, its green light brighter, focused like a predator's eye. With a monumental effort, he slammed the butt of his heavy revolver against the stone wall, creating a loud, sharp crack. The noise, though muffled by the desert's quiet, broke the sphere's hypnotic focus. It jumped back, its rotation momentarily erratic, the light flickering. Elias used the momentary reprieve. He fumbled in his pack and pulled out a small, polished silver mirror, a relic he had intended to sell, and hurled it with all his remaining strength. The mirror struck the stone wall 3 feet from the sphere. It didn't break. The green light from the sphere reflected sharply off the silver surface and momentarily lanced back toward the mechanism. The sphere emitted a loud, grating metallic screech, a sound of pain or perhaps systemic failure. It shot upwards violently, accelerating away from the light source, and vanished into the complete darkness above the roofline. The wave of nausea immediately subsided, leaving Elias weak but clear-headed. "It's gone." Marcus rushed forward, rifle ready. Elias, leaning heavily on the wall, struggled to catch his breath. No, it retreated. It responded to its own light, reflected. Light must be its sense organ, or its weakness. He picked up the silver mirror, now dented, but still reflecting. We bought ourselves time, Marcus, but the operator knows we're here. We need to get inside, now. The silence returned, but now it was a charged, hostile void. The town was no longer just empty. It was actively waiting. The psychological game had begun, and Elias knew that the man pulling the strings was listening, watching, and, most terrifyingly, thinking. The iron door of the Bank of Oakhaven was not locked in the traditional sense. It was sealed with a heavy, custom-made crossbar secured by two massive antique padlocks. The door itself was cold, thick, and resistant to all their shoulder-ramming efforts. "This is ridiculous," Marcus grunted, rubbing his shoulder. "This bar hasn't been touched in 20 years. We need dynamite." "No dynamite," Elias hissed, checking the surrounding street for any sign of the green light's return. "Explosives draw attention for miles. We came here for a secret, not a spectacle. Besides, look at the dust." Elias pointed to the ground directly beneath the large padlocks. A faint, almost invisible track was visible in the settled dust, a clean hairline groove barely wider than a thread, running from the lock mechanism down into the earth. "A wire?" Marcus bent low. "No, too fine and too regular. Look at the dirt on the crossbar itself." Elias ran his finger along the top edge. The dust was thick, but just under the main layer he found a patch that had been subtly brushed away, suggesting a recent careful application of something to the lock mechanism. Someone has been here, recently, but they haven't unsealed it. He produced a small, silver-plated skeleton key from his hidden pouch. It was an ornate, old-fashioned key he'd found clipped inside the journal of the town's last remaining assay officer. He inserted the key into the larger of the two padlocks. It turned with a soft mechanical sigh, a sound that carried unnervingly in the dead silence. Click. "Impossible," Marcus muttered, eyes wide. "That's a miracle." "No, Marcus, it's preparation," Elias corrected, pulling the key out. The original owner intended to return, or, more likely, knew the key would be his protection. But the second lock... The second padlock was a modern steel mechanism, cold and brutally effective. It had no obvious keyhole, only a smooth, rotating face marked with numbers, a combination lock. "This is the real barrier," Elias admitted. "The original lock was a sign of ownership. This one is a sign of control. The man who put this here knows the old history, but wants a new ending." They were stuck. The air was thinning, the cold intensifying, a subtle pressure returning to Elias's head. The unseen surveillance was resuming. Elias slumped against the wall, pulling out the frayed journal he carried. "We are looking for a sequence of 3 numbers, something personal, something tied to the abandonment." He flipped through the cracked pages until he found the final, frantic entry, dated 1877. "The lights are closer now, always the lights. The manager insists on the schedule, even as the house is empty. He promised us stability. He gave us precision. He said the mine could run forever, if only we were orderly. But his order is the madness. The last shipment leaves tomorrow. I will lock the silver and I will hide this record. The number must represent the 3 things he took from this town. Its time, its wealth, and its children." Elias read the last sentence aloud. "Time, wealth, and children. It's a psychological combination, Marcus, not a random one. We need the context." Suddenly, a loud clatter echoed from the direction of the doctor's office 2 streets away. It was the distinct sound of a sheet of corrugated tin sliding off a roof and hitting the ground, followed by a second, lighter noise, like a small rock skittering across wood. "They're drawing us out," Marcus realized, cocking his rifle. "Testing us. We can't be drawn out." Elias gripped his arm. "That is the trap. The lights vanished when we showed fight. The mechanism is controlled by the man who abandoned this place or his heir. He wants to know what we are after, and he wants us away from the bank." Elias thought desperately, pacing the 4 feet of safe cover by the door. Time, wealth, children. The time of the town's founding, 1865. The wealth produced at the peak. The biggest recorded haul was $92,000 in 74. The children. How many were here? The 1875 census listed 41 children under the age of 10. 1865. 92, 41. It was a guess, but a highly specific one, based on the only remaining evidence of the town's human history. "Marcus, watch the street," Elias said, his voice firm. He stepped up to the lock, the cold metal biting into his fingertips. He began to turn the dial. Click. 18, click. 65. He turned back. Click. 92. He turned forward again, his heart hammering against his ribs. Click. 41. Elias paused, his ear pressed against the lock. Nothing. He tried the crossbar. It remained sealed. He slumped, the cold despair washing over him. His logic was wrong. The journal entry was misleading, or his interpretation flawed. He looked back at the journal. The 3 things he took. He did not take the town's founding year. He did not take the children's census number. The manager took the life from Oakhaven. Wait. The journal's date, 1877, the abandonment year. That was the time he took. The wealth was in the bank, still locked away. The total estimated worth of the silver locked away, according to the bank manager's ledger, was exactly $250,000. The children. The manager was obsessed with order. He was a man of cold, inhuman rules. Elias remembered a chilling line from the ledger. "The youth of this town is reduced to account of its first 10 souls. A perfect, unmarred circle. The first 10 pupils." The manager wasn't a poet. He was a calculating monster. Elias's hands were shaking violently as he went back to the lock. First number, 77, the year the manager took the town. Second number, 250, the total vault value in thousands. Third number, 10, the manager's morbid perfect count. He repeated the sequence, 77, 250, 10. He turned the dial one last time. The lock snapped open with a loud, resounding thwack that echoed like a gunshot down the deserted street. Elias and Marcus exchanged a look of pure, adrenaline-fueled triumph, immediately undercut by the realization that the noise was deafening in the silence. The psychological barrier was gone, but the physical terror was about to begin. Elias grabbed the crossbar, pulling with desperate strength. The steel bar swung free, dropping to the dust with a heavy thud. They stared into the gaping, dark maw of the bank vault's interior. The air that rushed out was stale, cold, and smelled of dry paper and old copper. "After you, Professor," Marcus said, his voice now a little more steady, bolstered by the success. Elias stepped across the threshold, into the absolute, smothering darkness of the bank. His heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against the walls of his chest. He was in. But the man who put up the lights was now closer than ever. Elias produced a small, oil-filled tin lamp from his satchel, carefully lighting the wick. The weak, fluttering yellow light was barely an intrusion on the absolute darkness inside the Oakhaven Bank. The interior was a time capsule of abandonment. A dust-covered counter, scattered ledgers, and a massive black safe nestled in the back wall. The air was frigid, making the hairs on Elias's arms stand up. "Keep a sharp eye on the street, Marcus," Elias ordered, his voice echoing oddly in the space. "We're exposed now." The vault itself, which they had just entered, was less a place of riches and more a room of ordered decay. Shelves lined the stone walls, holding rows of meticulously labeled metal boxes, all thick with dust. It was the vault of a man obsessed with control, not just wealth. Elias moved to the central, free-standing safe. It was enormous. A black iron monument to 19th century security, its face dominated by a complex, rotating wheel and 4 heavy locking bolts. This was where the $250,000 in silver was supposed to be. He found the final journal, the one written by the manager himself, hidden beneath a stack of worthless, moldy banknotes. It was leather-bound, its pages filled with elegant Manic script. The cover read, "The Oakhaven Project, a Testament to Order." Elias skimmed the first page, his pulse quickening. 1877. The citizens left, as expected. They were merely the fuel for the engine. They were chaos. We remain, the engineers of permanence. The silver, the true wealth, is not ore. It is data, and the data must be guarded from all intrusion. My final machine is active. The watchman will patrol the perimeter. Its light will be a psychological deterrent. The sound of work will prevent rest. No man will feel peace here again. He called it the watchman, Elias murmured, looking at the ceiling, expecting the green sphere to crash through the wood. It's a guard dog, Marcus. A mechanical guard dog. Marcus, peering nervously through the dusty, grimy front window, suddenly straightened. Elias! The yellow light! It's back! Near the blacksmith shop! Elias rushed to the window, ducking below the level of the counter. The sickly yellow glow was indeed back at the ruins of the blacksmith shop, accompanied by the rhythmic, unnerving clanking. But this time, the clanking was louder, faster, and more frantic. It sounded like a piston working at an impossible speed. He's panicking, Elias realized, a chilling thought. He knows we're inside the vault. The yellow light is his source of power, or his workstation. He's building something, or perhaps repairing the watchman we damaged. He ran back to the safe, desperation driving him. He didn't need the silver. He needed the data. The key to the town's terror had to be in this final private space. The safe lock was a combination, but it had to be a different one. This was the manager's personal treasury. He looked at the inscription on the front of the safe. Ordo ab chao. Order from chaos. He opened the manager's final journal again, flipping to the very last, most disturbing entry. It was not numbers, but a series of letters crudely drawn in ink. TOMB. The realization hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. The manager's obsession wasn't just with silver or order, it was with death and secrecy. The combination must be the numerical equivalents of those 4 letters on the rotating alphabet dial of the safe. He examined the safe's dial. The numbers 126 corresponded to the letters AZT 20, O 15, M 13, B 2, 20, 15, 13, 2. A 4-number sequence, logical, morbid, and utterly human. Outside, the clanking was reaching a crescendo, a terrifying, rhythmic smash, smash, smash that seemed to vibrate through the bank's stone foundation. "Hurry, Elias," Marcus yelled. "The green light." "It's back on the roof. It's circling." Elias ignored the fear and the sound. He spun the dial. 20. Stop. 15. Stop. 13. Stop. 2. Stop. With a final desperate shove of the handle, the bolts retracted with a heavy K-chunk. He yanked the safe door open. Instead of stacks of silver, the safe held only a single dark metal box, roughly the size of a ledger, and an empty chamber where the silver should have been. "The silver is gone," Elias whispered, staring into the void. He used the bank's own vault to hide his real secret. He grabbed the metal box. It was cool to the touch and heavy, inscribed with the single word, contingency. Before he could examine it, the single dusty light source in the room, his lantern, was abruptly snuffed out. Not by wind, but by a sudden localized blast of air, like a bellows being emptied directly at the flame. They were plunged into absolute crushing darkness. A rasping, dry voice, amplified and distorted as if speaking through a crude brass funnel, scraped across the silence. It came from the shadows of the bank, and it was right behind them. "Intrusion. Not permitted." Elias whirled, his revolver aimed at the darkness. He felt Marcus's terrified presence beside him. The manager was here. He was not a ghost. He was real. And he had been waiting. The psychological game was over. The human confrontation had begun. The voice was a dry, mechanical whisper, unnervingly close. Elias fired his revolver instantly, aiming for the origin of the sound, a shape he could barely discern in the absolute dark near the vault entrance. The deafening blast of the shot was swallowed by the thick stone walls, and the muzzle flash revealed a brief, terrifying tableau. A figure, tall and gaunt, stood just inside the vault's outer door. He was dressed in the faded, dark clothes of a 19th-century man of industry, a vest and a dirt-caked bowler hat. But his most frightening feature was the device strapped to his chest. A large brass megaphone attached to a diaphragm, which explained the distorted, unnatural voice. The bullet missed, striking the stone wall. The figure didn't flinch. Instead, it raised a hand holding a thin metal object. "Cease, or the watchman will be instructed to apply pressure," the brass voice stated, its tone flat and unfeeling. "Marcus, get down!" Elias yelled, dropping behind the massive iron safe door. Marcus, already prone, crawled back, his rifle useless in the dark, confined space. "Who are you?" Elias shouted, his voice shaking but projecting authority. "I am the Keeper. I am the Order," the voice replied, the brass amplifying the words into a dull roar that resonated in their skulls. "The intrusion is unacceptable. The project must remain undisturbed." Elias realized they were not dealing with a man of simple malice, but a fanatic. This was the manager, alive and maintaining his 20-year obsession. "The silver is gone," Elias baited him. "You failed to protect the wealth. We saw the empty space in the safe." The Keeper gave a dry, humorless chuckle that crackled through the megaphone. "The silver was the bait for the chaos outside. The true wealth, the data, is in the metal box, and you have it." Elias quickly examined the contingency box in the brief light from Marcus's nervously fumbling lighter. It was secured by a tiny, intricate mechanism that required a miniature key. They couldn't open it here. Suddenly, the pressure returned to Elias's head, sharp and agonizing. It wasn't the watchman. It was the Keeper, who had activated a similar, localized sonic attack. Elias gasped, dropping the box. "Give the data to the Keeper," the brass voice commanded, its sound drilling into Elias's ears, blurring his vision. Marcus, however, was focused on something else. "He's got a device. A battery pack on his back, Elias. It's all just machines." In a flash of desperate inspiration, Elias remembered the weakness of the watchman. Light. He grabbed the silver mirror from his pocket and threw it, not at the Keeper's face, but toward a narrow shaft of moonlight filtering through a crack in the ceiling. The mirror landed, catching the thin beam of light and directing a tiny, brilliant speck of white light directly onto the Keeper's brass megaphone. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The megaphone emitted a shriek of screeching feedback, a sound of electronic pain as the light overloaded the delicate microphone or sensor. The Keeper staggered back, clutching the device, his terrifying voice replaced by a guttural human moan of surprise. "Now, Marcus! The main door!" Elias yelled. They scrambled out of the vault, the contingency box clutched in Elias's hand. As they reached the outer door, the Keeper recovered, dropping the disabled megaphone. He lunged, a silhouette of maniacal fury. "The project is sacred. The Order must be preserved," he shouted, his real voice thin and cracked with years of solitude. Marcus didn't hesitate. He swung the butt of his rifle, connecting with a sickening thud against the Keeper's shoulder. The old man cried out, stumbling backward against the vault door. They burst out onto the street. The air was frigid, the dust had intensified, and the silence was shattered. The green light, the watchman, was indeed circling on the roof above, its whirring sound now audible, an electric, relentless hum. And the yellow light, The clanking was still burning at the blacksmith shop, the frantic smash, smash, smash of the pistons signaling a renewed, accelerated effort. "He's got more of those things. The yellow light is his workshop," Marcus screamed, dragging Elias behind a water barrel. "We need to get out of the town limits," Elias insisted, gripping the metal box. "He can control the whole street. We head for the trail. We need distance." The watchman was dropping low, its green light intense, sweeping the street with its sickening glow. Elias knew its sonic attack was imminent. "The light's coming!" Marcus cried, aiming his rifle. "No, don't shoot! It'll draw the keeper out here too! Use the darkness! We run away from the lights!" The decision was a terrifying gamble. The keeper was an intelligent, motivated human threat. The watchman was a machine, a tool of his psychological warfare. As they sprinted across the main street, the green light settled directly over the empty spot where they had been hiding. The world around them suddenly felt like it was wobbling. The low-frequency pulse was activating, instantly inducing a fresh wave of blinding disorientation, nausea, and despair. Elias stumbled, falling hard onto the cracked wooden boardwalk. The contingency box skittered across the planks, stopping a few feet away. Through the dizzying haze, he saw a new threat, the yellow light from the blacksmith's shop. It was not coming from the window, but from a set of eyes, two precise, parallel beams of yellow light moving quickly down the side street toward the main square. The manager had more than one watchman. He had an army of machines, and this one was armed with a focused, blinding yellow beam like an aggressive mechanical firefly. The true horror of Oakhaven was not a ghost, but the human mind's capacity for calculated, manufactured terror and control. They were trapped between the watchman on the roof, the keeper in the bank, and the new yellow-eyed machine closing in fast. The yellow watchman moved with frightening speed and precision, its two parallel beams of light illuminating the dust a few feet ahead of it. It looked less like the hovering sphere and more like a small, blocky cart mounted on tiny, silent wheels, an entirely different type of machine built for a different purpose. Pursuit. Elias scrambled, his hands clawing at the rough planks, desperate to reach the contingency box before the yellow light engulfed it. The disorientation from the original watchman's sonic field was still debilitating. "The box. Grab the box, Elias," Marcus yelled, firing a shot from his rifle, not at the machine but at a shattered window on a nearby dry goods store. The sound of the glass shattering was a brief, disorienting distraction. The yellow watchman paused, its twin beams flickering toward the noise. Elias lunged, sweeping the metal box into his embrace, and rolled off the boardwalk into the relative safety of a drainage ditch filled with dust and dried leaves. "It's following the sound," Elias gasped, clutching the box. "It's not only observing, it's hunting." The green watchman, hovering above the bank, was still emitting its debilitating pulse. Elias knew they had to get away from its effective radius, or they would be paralyzed, easy targets for the more mobile yellow watchman. "The trail, Marcus. Now. We run north, away from the core of the town." They stumbled to their feet, using the dark, ruined wall of the general store as cover. The yellow watchman, having scanned the broken window, resumed its relentless approach, its twin lights now fixed on their position. As they ran, the clanking from the blacksmith's shop abruptly stopped. The silence that replaced it was heavy, suffocating. The keeper was done working. He was coming out. "He's free," Marcus said, his voice ragged with terror and exhaustion. "He's coming after us himself." The town, for 20 years a quiet tomb, was now a dynamic, mechanized hunting ground, orchestrated by one maniacal man. Elias risked a glance over his shoulder. He saw the green watchman dip low, hovering over the middle of the street, maintaining its field of sonic distortion. Behind it, a dark, fast-moving silhouette emerged from the bank's outer door, the keeper. He was carrying something long and thin, like a club or a staff. "We have to open this box," Elias panted, sliding down behind the thick metal carcass of an overturned wagon. It's the only leverage we have. If we can understand his project, we can stop him. The contingency box remained locked. Elias tried to pry the tiny lock with a knife blade. Futile. The yellow watchman's twin lights were now visible less than 50 feet away, its silent approach a psychological nightmare. "The key!" Marcus suddenly cried, remembering. "The key to the final combination lock, the one in your pouch." Elias fumbled in his pouch, pulling out the small, ornate skeleton key that had opened the outer bank door lock. It was a thin, old-fashioned mechanism. He tried it. The key was slightly too large for the intricate lock on the box. "No, no, no," Elias muttered, his logic betraying him. Then he remembered the manager's obsession with precision and order. He hadn't just used the key to open the first lock. He had used it as a gauge for the second. The manager would have used the exact same key for the most important data box, but perhaps slightly modified it to ensure absolute security. Elias ran his thumb along the key. It felt perfectly smooth. He looked at the tiny lock, trying to peer at its mechanism in the ambient darkness. Suddenly, the yellow watchman rounded the corner, its lights sweeping across the wagon. They were exposed. Elias acted on instinct. He grabbed the key and slammed it violently against the rough, cast-iron wheel of the wagon. The fragile, ornate end of the key snapped off, leaving a smaller, thinner piece of metal still attached to the main body. He inserted the broken, thinner tip of the key into the lock on the contingency box. It slid in perfectly. He turned it. A soft, clean click. Just as the yellow watchman's lights fully illuminated the wagon, Elias threw open the metal box. It was not filled with paper or ledgers. It contained a single small, highly polished piece of quartz crystal and a stack of 50 small, rectangular copper plates, each etched with incredibly fine, organized markings. "What is this?" Marcus whispered, staring at the strange contents. Elias grabbed the top copper plate. The markings were not words, but a complex series of geometric patterns, wires, and notations. It was a schematic. "This is it, Marcus," Elias said, his voice shaking with a terrifying realization. "This is the data. This isn't silver. This is the blueprint for the watchman and the keeper." He held up the copper plate. It detailed a complex mechanical design for a sonic emitter that matched the pulse he was feeling. The quartz crystal was clearly labeled as the power regulator. The manager had used a small-scale advanced form of electrical or magnetic induction, powered by the unusual natural properties of the local quartz, to create his terrors. The yellow watchman was only 10 feet away. The keeper was approaching quickly from the main street. Elias knew they had seconds. "The schematics are the key, Marcus. The plans. The manager's entire system is contained in these plates. We need to take these and destroy the central mechanism," Elias declared, his voice gaining a desperate certainty. "The blacksmith shop. That's where he keeps the power source, his industry, the frantic clanking. We must run for the shop." The horror was no longer a mystery. It was a human engineering project gone mad, and they now held the detailed plans for its destruction. The plan was a suicide rush, but it was the only option. The yellow watchman was 3 feet away, its lights blinding. The green watchman hovered, its sonic field making every bone in Elias's body ache. The keeper, staff in hand, was close enough for them to hear his labored, furious breathing. "We split up," Elias yelled, clutching the copper plates and the quartz crystal. "Marcus, run for the foothills. Draw the keeper away. I'm going for the blacksmith shop. I need 5 minutes." "I'm not leaving you," Marcus protested, his face pale with adrenaline. "This is not a negotiation." Elias snapped, the desperation giving his voice an edge of authority. "He wants the data. He wants me. Go. Draw his eye." Elias threw a handful of dust and debris at the yellow watchman's lights. The fine particles momentarily blinded the machine, causing it to halt and emit a high-pitched electric whine. Marcus, seeing the opening, sprinted toward the west edge of town, firing his rifle into the dirt near the blacksmith's shop. The keeper immediately pivoted toward the gunshot, his maniacal focus on the threat to his operations core. "Stop, you fool! The data is with the other one!" The keeper shrieked, but his attention was split. Elias used the precious seconds, scrambling toward the blacksmith's shop, dodging ruined timbers and rusted tools. The yellow watchman, having cleared its sensors, was now in full pursuit of Elias, the lights bouncing wildly, casting chaotic, menacing shadows. He burst into the blacksmith's shop. The air inside was thick with the stench of oil, burnt charcoal, and hot metal. The source of the clanking was instantly apparent. A massive, custom-built steam-powered engine, not a locomotive, but a single-piston machine designed to run continuously, relentlessly, driving nothing but a single, massive electric generator. This was the manager's industry, the engine of Oakhaven's terror. The entire structure vibrated with the continuous, rhythmic clank, clank, clank of the piston. It was not running frantically now, but with the steady, oppressive rhythm of a machine that never needed rest. The yellow light they had seen earlier was the fierce, focused glow of the generator's coil, churning out power. Elias ran to the core of the machine. He saw the complex custom wiring leading from the generator to a series of large induction coils buried beneath the earth, likely serving as the antenna that allowed the watchmen to float and broadcast their sonic attacks across the town's metal-rich soil. He pulled out the top copper plate and compared the schematic to the generator's wiring. His interpretation was confirmed. The system was built around the quartz crystal, which acted as a stabilizing conduit for the exotic magnetic or electrical field the manager was exploiting. Elias looked at the single fist-sized quartz crystal resting in a small shielded cradle connected directly to the generator's main wire. It was humming faintly, a pale internal white light flickering within its structure. He had to destroy the power regulator. He had to stop the watchman. Just as he raised the heavy metal box to smash the crystal, the main door of the blacksmith's shop slammed open with an echoing roar. It wasn't the keeper. It was the yellow watchman, which had silently rolled through the ruins outside and now stood in the doorway, its twin lights fixed on Elias. It was larger up close, clearly designed for internal sabotage. Before Elias could move, a third light appeared. A beam of blinding blue-white light from above. The green watchman had positioned itself in a broken ceiling beam. He was caught in a crossfire of light. The yellow watchman emitted a new sound, a pressurized hiss. A thin, needle-like projectile shot out from a small tube on its front, striking the wall beside Elias with a loud thwack. It was an air-powered bolt, capable of piercing flesh. Elias threw the contingency box at the yellow watchman. The heavy metal glanced off the machine's casing, doing no damage, but the machine paused its firing sequence, its sensors reacting to the impact. Elias used the distraction. He jammed the broken, sharp end of the skeleton key into the main power cable, leading to the quartz crystal. The key snapped. The copper wire was far too thick, but the metal-on-metal contact produced a brilliant, blinding arc of electricity. The entire generator unit shrieked, the yellow light exploding in intensity, forcing Elias to shield his eyes. The green watchman's blue-white beam from the ceiling wavered, then shut down completely. The sonic pressure immediately vanished. The yellow watchman's twin lights also died, leaving the machine inert, a blocky shadow in the doorway. The entire town felt like it collectively sighed as the field of engineered dread collapsed. Elias, gasping, stumbled back from the smoking generator. The steam engine, however, was still running, clanking away, its momentum too great to be stopped by a momentary surge. He had disabled the watchman, but the core engine of the manager's obsession was still running. And then Elias heard the heavy, uneven footfalls. The keeper was back, having abandoned the chase after Marcus, drawn by the electrical burst. The old man stood in the doorway, framed by the dying light of the sunset. He was no longer using the megaphone. His face, illuminated by the sputtering glow of the engine coil, was a mask of pure, unadulterated grief and rage. "You broke it," the keeper whispered, his voice cracking with genuine, agonizing heartbreak. "You broke the order." He raised the long, thin staff he was carrying. It was not a weapon, but a heavy, brass-tipped cane, the cane of a fragile, broken man. But the rage in his eyes made it a lethal weapon. "You've just witnessed the disabling of the horrifying Watchman. But the Keeper's human terror remains. Don't miss the final chapters of this confrontation. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell to join us for the climactic conclusion. The blacksmith's shop was a cage of shadow, the relentless clank, clank, clank of the engine the only sound. The Keeper stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette wavering in the steam and the dying light of the generator coil. His face, when visible, was contorted not by malice, but by the profound sorrow of a man watching his life's work, his order, crumble. "You don't understand," the Keeper whispered, stepping forward, his brass-tipped cane tapping rhythmically on the dirt floor, a macabre counterpoint to the engine. "They abandoned me. They chose the chaos of survival over the purity of the project. I had to keep the work running. I had to make them understand what they lost." "What you lost was your sanity, manager," Elias retorted, keeping the inert yellow Watchman between them. "You drove out an entire town with manufactured terror. You exploited their trust to create a personal, mechanized prison." The Keeper stopped, his eyes focusing on the copper plates Elias held. "The schematics, the data. You will return the data. It is the record of the only flawless system this town ever knew. It must be preserved." Elias looked at the man, old, frail, yet radiating a terrifying, single-minded will. The conflict was not about silver or gold, but about a man's devastating need for control in the face of human unpredictability. "I won't give it back," Elias said, his voice firm. "This data is the key to proving what happened here. The reason Oakhaven is a ghost town is sitting right here, still breathing, and I won't let you start your project again." The Keeper's face twisted into a snarl of agonizing desperation. He lunged, moving with a surprising, frantic speed. The brass tip of the cane swung in a wide, vicious arc aimed at Elias's head. Elias ducked, the cane whistling past him, shattering a nearby wooden shelf. He grabbed the nearest weapon, a heavy, fire-blackened anvil hammer, and swung it, not at the Keeper, but at the enormous, still-turning flywheel of the steam engine. Clang! The hammer struck the flywheel with a massive, ringing blow. The steel wheel shuddered, and the entire engine stuttered, the clank, clank, clank slowing for a terrifying second before the momentum compensated. The sound of the impact seemed to momentarily break the Keeper's concentration. He recoiled, clutching his ears. The rhythm of the engine was his comfort, his anchor to reality. Elias capitalized, not for escape, but to learn. Why the lights? Why the clanking? Why the relentless precision? The Keeper, slumped over his cane, looked up, his eyes glassy. He was exhausted, but the obsession was still burning. The lights were a schedule. The yellow was the forge time. The hour the work began. The green was the patrol time. The hour the chaos outside must be avoided. The town lived by the rhythm of the mine. I merely replaced the rhythm with the rhythm of the project. I gave them a constant, logical fear. It was a perfect system. Perfect. The truth was grotesque. The terror was a clock, a schedule. The manager had simply forced the populace to live in perpetual, manufactured dread. A schedule of fear replacing a schedule of work, until the anxiety became unbearable, and they fled. You wanted them to know you were still here. Elias realized, the full scope of the psychological torment sinking in. You wanted them to believe your order was running, even without them. Suddenly, the keeper's expression hardened. His eyes narrowed, focusing beyond Elias on the main power mechanism. Elias followed his gaze. The intense electrical arc caused by the broken key had overloaded a small secondary gauge attached to the main steam pipe. The gauge was glowing red-hot. "The safety valve," the keeper whispered, a new cold terror gripping his face. The surge. It compromised the main valve, the boiler pressure. The clank, clank, clank of the engine was not merely an annoyance now. It was a time bomb. With the safety valve compromised, the massive boiler that powered the engine was building pressure rapidly, a lethal force of compressed steam trapped inside. "We have to shut it down," Elias yelled, dropping the hammer and looking for a manual cutoff. "No!" the keeper screamed, lunging forward with a renewed, desperate strength. "The engine is the project. The engine is my work. If it stops, the order dies." He slammed his brass cane into Elias's leg. The force sent a searing pain up Elias's thigh, and he collapsed, dropping the copper plates. The keeper fell to his knees, not to fight, but to gather the fallen schematics, clutching them to his chest. The air in the small shop was now dangerously hot, heavy with the smell of superheated metal and steam. A low, agonizing moan came from the boiler, the sound of steel plates stretching past their limit. "Marcus!" Elias screamed, his voice raw with terror, knowing his partner was gone, following the diversionary plan. Elias crawled toward the main steam pipe. He needed to vent the pressure before the entire thing exploded, taking half the town, and them, with it. He found a massive rusted iron wheel, the manual pressure release. The keeper, his eyes wide with fanatical devotion, scrambled to block the wheel. "No, I will not allow it. The order must stand. Even in destruction, it must be mine." Elias threw himself at the man, driven by the pure, life-saving terror of the impending explosion. He grabbed the manager by his tattered vest, not to harm him, but to pull him away from the valve. The man was surprisingly strong, fueled by a final insane surge of will. Their struggle was a pathetic, gasping tussle in the oppressive heat and deafening clank, clank, clank. Elias finally used his advantage, the anvil hammer, which he swept toward the keeper's legs. The man cried out, stumbling, and Elias grabbed the heavy iron wheel. He turned it, grunting against the resistance of 20 years of rust. "Screech!" A violent, deafening jet of white steam exploded from the ruptured gauge, blinding Elias, scalding the air, and enveloping the entire room in a thick, choking cloud. The sound was like 1,000 frantic whispers, and the heat was unbearable. Elias pulled back, his skin burning, his lungs seizing. The clank, clank, clank of the engine finally, mercifully stopped, replaced by the terrifying continuous hiss of venting steam. The keeper was gone, swallowed by the cloud, having finally achieved the ultimate silent order of his own making. Elias lay on the dirt floor of the blacksmith's shop, gasping for air, his skin throbbing with the raw heat of the escaping steam. The silence was absolute, save for the diminishing hiss of the boiler and the ragged, desperate sound of his own breathing. The engine of Oakhaven's terror, the project, was finally dead. He pushed himself up, his legs searing from the keeper's cane strike. The shop was still filled with a thick, white, acrid cloud that smelled of hot oil and sulfur. He searched the small, central area. The keeper was nowhere to be seen. The force of the venting steam, or perhaps the sheer, overwhelming devastation of his life's work, being destroyed, had consumed him. Elias found the brass-tipped cane leaning against the inert engine, and the scattered copper plates lying near the blast site, now slightly scorched but intact. Elias gathered the schematics, tucking them securely back into the contingency box. This was the evidence. This was the real horror story of Oakhaven, not ghosts, but the calculated madness of a man obsessed with control, who had turned the very mechanisms of industry against his fellow man. He stumbled out of the shop and back into the street. The air was still cold, but the oppressive magnetic feeling was gone. The Green Watchman was a dark, silent sphere nestled in the rafters of the bank, and the Yellow Watchman was an inert cart in the blacksmith's doorway. They were just machines now, broken toys of a dead fanatic. "Marcus!" Elias shouted, his voice hoarse. "Marcus, it's over! The engine is stopped!" Only the relentless desert wind answered him. A spike of fresh, terrible anxiety hit Elias. Marcus had been the perfect decoy, drawing the keeper away, but had he also drawn the threats? Elias limped toward the west end of town, following the trail of Marcus's retreat. He passed the general store, the saloon, and the remnants of the houses, all silent, all dark. The moon, now high, cast long, crystalline shadows that felt less menacing and more melancholic. He found Marcus near the edge of the desert trail, lying face down in the dust. "Marcus!" Elias dropped to his knees, his heart sinking. He turned the man over. Marcus's eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the moonlit sky. There was no blood, no bullet wound, no visible injury, but his body was completely rigid. His face was a mask of sheer petrified terror. Elias checked his pulse. It was faint, shallow, but still there. Marcus was alive, but in a state of profound shock, a mental break caused by overwhelming psychological trauma. Elias looked around frantically. Had the keeper gotten to him before the engine exploded? Had he been caught by the Yellow Watchman's projectile? He carefully examined Marcus's body. Nothing, but he saw a small, glinting object clutched in Marcus's hand. It was a piece of wire, a single thin strand of copper that had been pulled taut, wrapped around his thumb. Elias followed the wire. It led back across the desert floor, almost invisible in the moonlight, toward the main street. It was a single long strand, and it was connected to nothing. It was simply lying on the ground, stretching out like a line of fate. Elias followed the wire, pulling it carefully, until he reached a spot near the ruined well. There, the wire was secured by a single carefully placed rock. And under the rock, he found the final chilling piece of the puzzle. It was a small, hand-drawn map. The map wasn't of Oakhaven. It was a complex, highly detailed schematic of the surrounding foothills and trails. Drawn onto the paper was a series of lines, marking the precise elevation and placement of 6 different copper wires, all laid by hand, all completely unpowered, stretching out from the town's limits. And at the end of each wire, a tiny handwritten note. The trip line. The illusion of a trap is sufficient. Elias understood everything. The Keeper, the great engineer of psychological warfare, had not only used his floating machines and his engine of sound, he had used the oldest, simplest, most human trick of all, the illusion of a complex trap. The wire Marcus had pulled was a dummy line, meant to trick anyone escaping into believing they had triggered a lethal booby trap. The simple act of pulling the taut, unpowered wire, believing they had narrowly escaped death, was enough to send a man whose nerves were already frayed into a state of permanent psychological collapse. The manager's true genius wasn't in advanced engineering but in human cruelty. He had perfected the art of weaponizing the mind's own fear. Elias looked at his partner, broken by a piece of string and his own terror. He was not injured, but he was fundamentally, irrevocably shattered by a fear of nothing. The fear was the bullet. The wire was the trigger. Elias had the data. He had the proof. But he had lost his friend to the invisible, manufactured terror of a ghost town. The true horror of Oakhaven was the confirmation that the greatest terror lives not in the darkness, but in the human expectation of it. The dawn arrived not with the gentle illumination of a new day, but with a harsh, blazing brutality, turning the red dust of Oakhaven to a blinding orange glare. Elias had spent the remaining hours of the night trying to revive Marcus, but his friend remained in a catatonic state, his eyes fixed in an expression of quiet horror. Elias covered him with his own blanket, the weight of the loss pressing down on him. He secured the copper plates and the quartz crystal in the contingency box and slung his pack over his shoulder. The sun revealed the true state of the blacksmith's shop, a scene of organized mechanical carnage. The steam engine was cold, the boiler hissing its final weak breaths. The keeper was indeed gone, likely consumed by the superheated steam, achieving his ultimate order through annihilation. Elias stood on the main street of Oakhaven, surveying the scene of the human conflict. The Green Watchman was a dull, dark sphere. The Yellow Watchman was a rusted cart. They were merely the props in a grand 20-year psychological performance staged by a single madman. He knew what he had to do. The data was not meant for a newspaper headline. The story of Oakhaven, the reality that a human mind, driven by an insane desire for order and control, had perfected a system of non-lethal psychological terror to empty a town, was too delicate, too dangerous for the public to fully grasp in 1897. They would demand ghosts. They would invent the supernatural. The simple, cruel human truth would be dismissed. Elias walked back to the bank. He pushed the heavy iron vault door shut. He replaced the crossbar. He manually reset the modern combination lock to an arbitrary, unguessable sequence. The second, antique padlock he left open, a deliberate signature. He would leave the bank's secret, the empty safe, the final ledger, and the truth of the silver's disappearance intact. He had the contingency box. He had the schematics for the sonic emitter, the blueprints for the mechanical lights, and the horrifying logic of the trip line. This data would not be published. It would be delivered in secret to the only organization that would understand its terrifying implications: the United States Army Corps of Engineers, or perhaps a select few pioneering researchers in the new field of psychology. The world was not ready for the idea that fear itself could be mass-manufactured, a weapon more potent than dynamite. The journey back was arduous. Elias had to strap Marcus onto the saddle of the second horse, ensuring his head remained supported. The sight of his broken friend was a constant, crushing reminder of the cost of the truth. Elias was no longer an ambitious collector of history. He was a keeper of secrets. 3 days later, they reached the first outpost, a small, dusty relay station. Elias contacted a trusted high-ranking colleague through a telegraph office, arranging for Marcus's safe, discreet transfer to a private, specialized institution in San Francisco. He simply reported a mining accident involving extreme shock. The true cause, a phantom wire and a field of manufactured dread, was kept only for the schematics. Elias sat in the small, dingy saloon of the outpost, drinking stale coffee, the contingency box resting heavily on the table before him. He opened it one last time, looking at the intricate copper plates and the quartz crystal. The crystal, now inert, was just a simple, beautiful rock, yet it held the potential for unspeakable human cruelty. The story of Oakhaven was now complete. The fear was human. The mechanism was scientific, and the resolution was a tragic private one. The town's terror was not the result of a curse, but the calculated malice of a man who believed order was worth any price, even the destruction of the human spirit. Elias closed the box. He would deliver the proof, ensuring the technology of fear was locked away from those who would use it. He had followed the lights in the ghost town, not after midnight, but just before. He found the truth, and the price was the loss of his friend. The final lesson of Oakhaven was not a warning about the supernatural, but a terrifying warning about the unfettered, unmonitored potential of the human mind to create its own, perfectly logical and perfectly devastating hell. He stood up, leaving the empty town to the silence it had always deserved. The desert wind was blowing, but now it only carried dust, not the unsettling, rhythmic clanking of a madman's heart.